Good garbage gets recycled. Great garbage is regenerated.
Hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage? Happy New Year! I wish all of you lots of learning and impact in 2024. I'm so happy to start this year recording with the amazing Ben Mascarello, the CEO of Genera Inc. Ben and I met last year on the sidelines of the International Molded Fibers Conference and immediately struck a chord. Ben had been listening to the podcast for a while, and it was great to hear somebody of that stature congratulate us for the work that we were doing. We were on similar journeys with our belief in agricultural fiber pulping and creation of compostable food serviceware. Ben, of course, has a much richer track record with packaging and has spent a majority of his career with Novalex, a giant in the field. Genera is taking some bold steps with a $350 million expansion, and I'm sure of success with Ben at the helm of affairs. This is an open, fun, easy, flowing conversation with deep insights in the domain of using agri-fibers and creating deep value. Hope you learn as much as I did. Enjoy the conversation. I also need to add a disclaimer to this conversation. Ben and I had been trying to coordinate our schedules and get this recording together, and eventually we found a date that would work, except that I was suffering from a really bad throat on the day, but I didn't want to lose this opportunity. So we went ahead and recorded anyways, but what you would notice is that my voice is raspy, I'm coughing a little bit, and I have just a bad throat. I deeply apologize for that, but I'm sure overall you would find the conversation exciting despite my state of affairs. Hello. Today we have the pleasure of having Ben Mascarello, the CEO of Genera Incorporated. Ben and I met a few months back, actually, Ben, right? At International Molded Fibers Association. And I felt an immediate affinity to you, Ben. So it was really nice meeting you. And I'm very excited about this conversation. So thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a big honor. I'm a fan of the show, so I'm really excited to be here. I'm humbled by it because you had some impressive people on. I'm not sure I'll live up to the standard, but we'll do our best.
You say that, but I know this is going to be a very interesting conversation from my perspective because I'm going to learn a lot. And that's just apparent by your kind of background, and we'll delve into that. But one thing we couldn't find out much about was your growing up years and your influences, and you of course worked in numerous packaging disciplines. Would love to know, what were the growing up, and if there are particular incidences that shaped your life, it'll be great to hear those as well.
Sure. Yeah. I again, this was one of those things that, as I think about your podcast, you've had these people who have these great origin stories, their moment of realization that they needed to do what they were doing. And I don't know that I really have anything like that I can speak to. I think really where, what's shaped me over time and who I am is that I've always really focused on problem solving. So solving big problems, finding solutions to things that just aren't in order. And that's something that's been kind of a characteristic of me for as long as I can remember, and why I gravitated toward engineering when I studied in university. And then from there, in manufacturing and management consulting was where I spent a lot of my career. And just kind of solving those tough intellectual nuts was something that was, something that I enjoyed. And so as my career progressed, I ended up spending a fair amount of time in the packaging industry. This whole problem of waste and what to do with it all is something that in packaging is always present. It's always top of mind because it's, what happens with this item when it's achieved its purpose. So it's always been something that I've thought about and something that spent time on. And so figuring out what to do about that, figuring out, how to address those issues, that's been something that I've always found intriguing. And that's sort of what ended up bringing me to Genera, is that those end of life solutions were solved in a very interesting way. That's really how I got to where I am.
And you've definitely taken a big challenge to solve. When you look at your your intention to solve big problems, I don't think this is a small one by any stretch of imagination. So great
Yeah.
that we have people like you trying to do this. But I also see in your career as it progressed, you went to Korsnäs, which is Billerud Korsnäs, which is such a wonderful company. They do some really innovative products, and you've spent a lot of time with Novalex, which is also maybe more plastics, but still, doing very, very interesting products. So,
It's about half and half, actually, Novalex is. Most people don't know that, but it's about 50-50. Yeah.
is
Hmm.
that paper bags, or are you talking about the eco product side?
No, the eco is separate, totally different. But
Mm.
from the manufactured side, it's about half paper and half plastic. So it's a lot of
Huh.
bags and wraps and clamshells, lots of different fiber products as well.
Oh, that's interesting to know. Great. So we have even more to talk about. So of course,
Okay.
those, and then I want to also delve into the whole Alex Partners, the consulting piece that you did in between. But let's stay with packaging first. And how did that shape your journey? And these were clearly very, very significant packaging operations that you actually headed.
But as I think about packaging and my time there, the Coursionist thing was early on and learned a lot in that early period. It was a small startup business that was, a U.S. operation that was a spin out or a subsidiary of the bigger Coursionist that was in Europe. So trying to build a business was something that was a big challenge. I think we had a unique product at the time because it was a multi-wall paper bag business that was using European fibers, European papers. So we were taking a lot of the industry, which was typically in a three-layer paper sack, to a two, which at the time was kind of unique, innovative, and many of the competitors at the time said, "Oh, that's not possible." So we were overcoming a challenge that was, in the market perceived to be, it was something that we needed to prove. So there was an element of that had some parallels to what we're doing now at Genera, which was good in
And
terms.
were the usages mostly boxes, or was it something else?
No, multi-wall paper sacks. So it was a lot of dry goods. So concrete bags. You think about a lot of food products. So, but it was all dry
Basically,
solids.
extensible sack kind of
Yeah,
domain.
valve sacks really is what a lot of it was.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Alex partners, because I guess when you're on the other side of the table and you're advising, you also learn about multiple businesses, I presume. Did
Mhm.
you did you primarily focus on packaging, or was it very wide?
Yeah, no, not at all focused on packaging. So a lot of my background's been in manufacturing, so it was pretty broad-based manufacturing businesses. Alex Partners is a turnaround firm, so there were some businesses that were in distress, some that were not. So different from my management consulting time in that there was generally a burning platform, there was generally a need to drive change in a rapid fashion. And typically there was a big challenge that needed to be addressed. We would come in, sort that out, and that was really how I ended up at Novalex, because that was at the time on the front end. It was a project. It was a client that we came to see and ended up enjoying it so much, enjoying the team that they asked me to stay, and I left the firm to go and join that business.
Yeah, another thing that intrigued me when I was reading through your CV was that it was pretty quick after your MBA that they made you the CEO at Corsnäs. What was that? What was it about you that they felt that you can actually lead a business? You were presumably young. You were maybe in your 30s or even younger.
Yeah, it was early 30s. I was with Arthur D. Little for about 5 years though after grad school. So I'd been doing a fair amount of management consulting. I was in Europe for a while, moved back to the States, spent some time in the Chicago office for Arthur D. Little, and it was actually one of the partners from ADL that was on the board of the Corsnäs business. And so he was the one who reached out to me and actually contacted me originally to lead the Chicago office for that consulting firm that he was running. And I said, "No, I don't really want to be a consultant anymore. I would like to, run something, do something." He basically said, "Well, why don't we just have a meeting?" And I didn't realize it was a job interview. It ended up turning into, a meeting with him and a couple of other board members. And at the end of the meeting, they said, "Hey, how would you like to come here and run this thing?" So it was kind of a random thing that got me to where I was looking to go anyway.
And get your hands dirty. I have a friend who worked for years in academia, and he was one of the really well known pulp and paper kind of professors. And somebody just challenged him once. He said, you keep talking about all this, but you've never run a thing. So he actually dropped everything, and he's now the CEO of one of the big companies and has been the CEO of various companies and has done very well. And I would not have imagined that, considering that he was deeply enmeshed into.
It's a really good example there because and that's I've said that many times. I mean, it was a big part of why I took that jump was as a consultant, you frame things out, you make recommendations, you put things into place, and then often you're frustrated because it doesn't get executed the way that you said. And I realized that that was a little bit, it was a little bit arrogant to say, okay, well, this is how it should be. And to actually be in the chair and execute is much harder. And there are a lot of other factors that come into play in running a business. So, rather than saying being indignant that things weren't being executed properly, to go and sit in the chair and do it was important to me. So, taking on that challenge was, it was an important part of me demonstrating that these things could be done. And you learn a lot when you get into that spot, as I know that you always have a plan. You never execute the plan the way you thought.
Yeah, but nobody's ever given me a consultant's job. I at one point thought that maybe I should get into investment, but I said this is too much fun what I'm doing. So I would stay with, growing the business rather than getting into a more passive role. People still keep mentioning that, but I'm like, I enjoy this too much. But tell me, you've worn both these hats, and you kind of mentioned that it's very different from what you imagine, because of course you're coming in and you're advising people what to do, and some people are following your advice and maybe succeeding a lot. But then when you come on the other side, what are the realizations that you had that you maybe did not think about as a consultant?
I think that it's easy when you're in a more theoretical world, when you're studying engineering or you're thinking about, systems, to get caught up in, how things should work, how things should flow. But in the end, there are mechanical systems, there are big systems in terms of process and structure, but they're always driven by people. And what I've found over time in my career is that, you end up being driven more by the people and how they receive the messages, how they understand how things should go, how they interact with one another. That's a lot more important than the most perfect design of what that process should look like, what that system should be. The people in place, recognizing that, understanding that, working together, and having complementary skill sets, being able to help one another is a really important part of that. And I think that's the biggest part of the difference between solving that big intellectual nut as you do as a consultant and actually making it happen and making it successful.
Do you use consultants at all?
I do. I do. I'm fairly demanding on those folks. I really think there's always an application for when you can bring in expertise, smart people to help you to solve some issue. So in fact, recently we did a project within Genera where I brought in some folks that I had used before. It was a flow issue. So we're expanding pretty rapidly right now. We put in some new machines and we hadn't thought through all of the material flow and all the details in the way that, I would have liked ideally. And so we had them come in, they spent a few weeks, they ironed out some things. They worked very closely with my team, and it was kind of a collaborative effort, but the expertise they brought was very valuable. And that I think is a really, it's useful to have that help to bring in when you have it available.
Yeah, and I think it's also an outside perspective, I guess. When you're deeply enmeshed, you end up having tunnel vision sometimes. You cannot maybe see it, and maybe somebody coming in. So I'm glad you're still giving them a job, to do, rather than saying, okay, I know this stuff, I can handle it. So it's very interesting what you mentioned before in terms of people. My father, I remember, used to say, that if you set up a machine that is not very good, maybe it's a 20% level machine, and you have people which are exemplary, 80%, your machines are going to run at 60, 70%. If you reverse that and you set up a plant which is at superb, you have the best machines in the world and it's very well designed, but your people quality and the people, and by quality, I also mean what you were saying, your team management is at a low level, 20, 30%, you're probably going to work at that level. Your outputs are going to be that. So it's interesting that you mentioned that as well.
No, I love that example. That's so true. It is so true. I mean, I've seen great teams work with really inferior, well, suboptimal, we'll say, equipment, or in a building that's not structured where it's easy to get things done, but the right team and applying some creativity to that has an amazing impact on things. So great teams way more important than a lot of the other things. It's your first thing. It's always helpful to have great equipment that's new and all kinds of things like that. But if you have the wrong team, it all fails.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But the thought that went through my mind, I was in Estonia once, maybe even 15 years back, and they had just separated from Russia. And I went to this mill, and it was the funniest sight I've ever seen. This was actually an extensible sackcraft mill, like the one you were talking about, and there were sofas right in the middle of the machines with Russian women knitting. And I was
Sofas.
like, what? Yeah, like couches, couches in the middle, like really cushy couches. Like I
Wow.
would not have imagined that in the middle of two machines, this woman, this senior Russian woman, is knitting. And I was like, it's working. Even then, I don't know how the team was, but the mill manager was Indian, and he said it's a tough one to manage the labor there. But they still produced, and they still hopefully succeeded. But that was an interesting vision that came to me after years back as you were speaking.
Yeah. I spent a little bit of time in Estonia when I was
You
working in
did?
Europe,
Okay.
actually. Yeah, it's a
It's an interesting
really
country.
interesting country. It's so different geographically where it's located, and the culture is very
And the
different.
education level, is they've
Yeah,
really invested in education
amazing.
post the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them very, I think both those, Finland and Estonia, have done a lot of effort towards education.
Yeah. Well, and I think the former communist control of that stuff, there was some, it was important. Everybody got educated. So the factory we were working with at that time, there were machine operators on the floor running equipment who had engineering degrees. These guys were very bright. And, when you were trying to get something done, they understood things at another level of detail that I really hadn't seen in other manufacturing sites. It was impressive.
Now, that's a different perspective than the one that I had in my mind, but
Oh, really?
you're right. Yeah,
Yeah, there were no
because
sofas
I
with
just saw
people
this.
knitting at the place I went to. It
Yeah,
was
exactly. But so moving on, you join a company called Hilux Poly, and which is probably making poly bags. But did it get taken over by Novalex, and was that the shift to Novalex? Because I see that it moved its name to Novalex. What happened there?
Yeah, no, Hilex was the seed that became Novalex. So Hilex was the original business. So that was where I went. It was a client at the time, and I was running the operations for a period of time as a consultant. Neat little business. It was very efficient overall. It was a business that was just in. It wasn't a broken business or anything like that from some of the other Alex Partners stuff. It was just a business that had some tough competition and needed to be changed a bit. So that was the initial kernel of what was Novalex, and that was that is a business that still has a lot of good things going on. But that was the base that we changed the name. We had plastic bags. We bought paper bags. So the Duro business came in. So we were sort of substrate neutral at that point, and then we added Bagcraft and various other businesses. So that was the original piece. And when we ended up buying Duro, it didn't make sense for the company to be called Hilex Poly anymore. So it became Novalex.
And it's grown significantly. So what would you ascribe that growth to, and what were the reasons that they were able to do so well? I'm sure there are learnings for us, the listeners, and me about that kind of path, because especially it is in the packaging domain and doing, as you said, very, very interesting range of products.
Yeah. So at Novalex, we started off. We did 14 acquisitions over time, and it's become a big business largely through acquisition. We had some great investment partners. We had a few different private equity groups that owned the business over time that helped to charge that, and really, Stan Bicklage, the CEO there, is he's got an incredible talent for getting deals done. So he was able to he and the team and the partners from the private equity folks they basically brought together a whole bunch of different businesses and essentially the sequencing really worked out well for us. So you make your luck in some respects. Sometimes things just come together in the right order, and that's what happened there. Was we had good timing. We had, the right opportunities come in the right sequence, and we had, some good people that brought it all together. So it was quite a journey, and it was, I'm really grateful to have been there for all of that. It's one of those, Harvard Business Review case study kind of things that you would read about, and it almost seems fairy tale like in terms of the growth rate, the success that we had, the improvements that we had within each of those businesses. I'm very proud of the fact that all of those businesses got a lot better from when we bought them to having been a part of the company. Every one of them improved dramatically from year zero to year one in terms of their safety performance, how the people were able to integrate with the company and elevate certain people into the broader company and do more across a bigger portfolio of businesses. It was a fun thing. It was a great experience for me.
If you pay your consultant's hat back, what would you say? Like this, that's seriously dramatic growth. And what would you say were the main reasons? Of course, the CEO was driving it, but was it a lot of customer centricity, understanding the market, and then growing? Because you can grow really fast and fail, right? There's so many businesses, probably more businesses who go through that journey than this way. So, what kept them really strong? And of course, they are today a force to reckon with.
Business acquisition, business integration is hard. It's something that a lot of people get wrong, right? So when we did the first big acquisition, it was right around 4th of July, 2013. So we were having a party at my house. My wife and we hosted a bunch of family and whatever. And I was excited because we had just done this deal. And I was telling somebody that we had just made this acquisition and expanded the company. And my wife was taking some business classes at the time, and she said, she walked into this conversation. She said, I read that 80 something percent of acquisitions fail. Here I was talking about this thing that I was very excited about and that we were on this expansion. And she kind of, rained on my parade a little bit. But, it actually caused me to think about that. And I did a little bit of research and, read some things about why those things fail and, tried to be pretty thoughtful about how we integrated those teams. And a lot of what I did over that arc was that bringing those teams together, sort of integrating them, respecting those teams for what value they brought, what value those businesses brought, but specifically the people, back to the people and the systems, and trying to figure out how they plug in, what they're doing well, how we can gain from that, and not necessarily, all right, how do we assimilate them? How do we make them like us? But how do we gain from that? And I think that was a massively important element of the success in that growth was that we were able to harness that with those people. I think we were pretty effective at integrating those teams in a very respectful way and gaining from what it was that they were doing that was different.
Yeah, trust the wives to show us the mirror, though. We were just talking
Yeah.
about that before we started recording, right? So, so of course, you make this big shift after years with Novalex. What is it? Almost 15 years or something,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, with Novalex between Hilux Poly and moving to Novalex, then you make this big shift. Of course, I know there's a brief stint somewhere else, but there's this big kind of role that you take up with Genera. And how did that come about and what attracted you to that business?
Genera was a business actually that I had heard about a couple years before that. And I thought, wow, that is a really cool company. That is a business that's doing something that's really unique. and special. So, I knew that. We kind of went on. I was in this sabbatical. I was actually getting ready to say, okay, it's time for me to go back and do something else. And I was interviewing pretty actively for a few different roles, all of them larger manufacturing businesses, multiple plants, things like that. And this thing kind of came across my radar and it just sort of spoke to me. So there are not many real avenues to get domestically produced molded fiber products in the US. We were buying a lot of containers, thousands of containers of that product from Asia, largely in my prior role. And we had looked for that solution and it didn't exist. And so this was one where I felt like they had the technology, they were thoughtful in the way that they were deploying it, and they were doing it already. They were proving out some of this and on a smaller level, and had recently gotten a good investment partner who was there to be able to drive the growth and take it to scale. And so, it was a business that I think needs to exist. It is a business I think needs to exist. It's a business that has a really important place in the industry. And it's, taking it to scale, that's an area where I think I can help them. So that was where I felt like there was an overlap between what I could do and what the business could do, and where I think it was a good connection.
And you knew the domain of packaging. I guess that always helps. It's not just, I guess, manufacturing. You could come from a PE kind of background and say that I'm going to fix everything. But you also had deep roots in manufacturing, and I presume also with some of the customers and things like that. But let's talk a little more about Genera. So I don't know that much about it, but I read Kelly Tiller, I think, was one of the founders or was the
Yep.
founder. How did that come about? Because I think she was in education, and she
Yeah.
decided to found something so crazy drastic, in the sense of manufacturing pulp in USA, that to miscanthus and switchgrass. That's a pretty
Yep.
wild idea, and she ends up executing it. One is, of course, to have a great idea. Many do, but it kind of fails at the lab or the pilot level. But it went beyond, and would love to hear the story of Kelly.
Sure. Yeah. So originally, Genera was it was an incubator business that was started by the University of Tennessee. Kelly was a professor there and was involved with this project, and then became the CEO of it. And eventually, it spun out from the university. And initially, it was started to be a biofuels business. So same crops, same basic raw material. So it's a biomaterials, biomass business. There was a partnership with DuPont to make biofuels. That didn't work out. DuPont ended up pulling out, and it left the business with other things to think about. And so through various different iterations, it went from this biomass biofuels business to becoming more of a biorefinery, pulp mill, otherwise known as. But the biorefinery and the molded fiber business was something that kind of took shape much later. And that the initial piece of that in converting over what was that biofuels plant to the biorefinery and adding in the molded fiber assets was something that happened much later. And so at a smaller scale, they had begun that, proven the concept out. And then basically the ARA Partners is our private equity ownership. They are a really interesting business. They are a decarbonization fund. They're in their third fund. They just raised about $3 billion in the third fund. And they're committed to this, and they've got serious wherewithal behind that. So they had come in and said, okay, we need to build this much bigger than what it is. And so they came in with a plan, and that was where this expansion came on. So Kelly had been there for a long time, and she's great. She's a obviously very smart person. She was, kind of a high flyer within the University of Tennessee academic situation over there, and then left to do this because she's got incredible passion for it, and really believes in the connection to agriculture and farming, the local community, and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of core um, there's a lot of core understanding of what we're trying to do from a crop perspective, from an agriculture perspective that feeds this. But at that point, I think she realized too that to build this thing the way that it needed to be built, it wasn't something that she had done before. And so she's been incredibly generous and accepting and supportive of me coming in and taking that CEO role. She's now our chief strategy officer, and she's kind of diverted her focus a little bit more right now to what we're going to do with the lignin, which is the other product that we make. And there are unprecedented levels of research and capital being invested in what the uses are for that product. So got some we've got good outlets for that now. We think that that's something that will be an incredible growth engine for the business in the longer term. And the plant has been built in a very deliberate way to make that lignin more recoverable and have it be something that we can develop in the longer term. So that was the story of where Genera got there today. But
And it's also, I would say, it's impressive from Kelly's standpoint to be able to realize that there is what she's interested in and where does she bring value, and to be able to find somebody who can do the side of the business and really build it. So I would definitely, yeah, it's definitely high compliments to her to be able to get that and kind of stick to what she enjoys.
like I said, I'm very grateful for her taking me in there and basically supporting this transition and supporting the shift that we've had, which has been significant in a lot of ways. So
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's a founder-led company, and switching is never easy. But let's stay with the lignin, because so many people seem to have gotten into this idea of lignin being this magic material, and there is a string of failures, right?
yeah,
So, are there things that you guys are seeing? Because what I remember, we dabbled with lignin maybe 20 years back. And yes, it could be extracted, it was a great material, but the market wasn't there. The price that we were getting in the market wasn't worth the effort to extract. So I presume there has been more understanding and possibilities that have opened up.
yeah, there are. So there, like I've said, there is an incredible amount of research and focus going into lignin at this point. Some of that is related to the fact that there is a bigger push for biomaterials in general. And lignins have all sorts of properties that can be used for a number of applications. So the early ones are relatively simple as binding agents. So it can be used in construction products, animal feed, some simple things like that. There are an awful lot of research projects going on right now that have medical applications and bioplastics. So there are some things that are going on. A lot of Scandinavian countries in particular are doing some pretty high-end research, but we've also got some partnerships domestically in the US between a few different universities, some research institutions, Hudson Alpha and Oak Ridge National Labs right near where the plant is. So there are some connections that my team has there. And those research projects, I think, will change the economics significantly, where I expect that lignin will be a larger driver of revenue for the business than the fiber will be in the long term.
So let's talk more about. So you have the molded fiber side. Let's talk more about that. What all you're doing there, and of course this lignin side developing. And if there are any more sides of Genera's business, and then I want to dive more into the raw material and how you are handling that. But let's take the product side first.
Yeah, no, and that's really that's really the whole basis of what Genera is, right? If we really think about the molded fiber business, and as I mentioned before, it is something that needs to exist. There have been a few companies that have tried to create a domestic molded fiber business, and it really hasn't been developed at a scale that we have. And so, as I think about Genera, the biggest differentiators are the fact that we have this connection to agriculture. So we think about where we begin. That raw material component is very important, and the fact that we have that being built around the plant. So we currently are bringing in materials from a few different places, but the intent is that we will have all of that product grown within a 90-mile radius of the plant. So that has an incredible value in terms of footprint and carbon as we ship things all around the world. But it also has some other very important elements of it that kind of brings me to that second differentiator, which is that local domestic footprint overall. And if you think about fiber, moving things into a fiber product is always a better thing, mainly because of the end of life answers, right? But the problem with a lot of that is that one of the bigger reasons why molded fiber is awesome is because it can be composted, and it's got this whole end of life element to it that really brings home the value. But if you think about the supply chains currently, you're generally growing that somewhere in Southeast Asia. It's being pulped, it's being shipped over typically to China, then it's being shipped across an ocean, and then so there's a whole bunch of transport that's happening along the way to that product. And so what Genera has is there's this starting point with those local farms where you grow it. You transform it into whatever molded fiber package in the plant there locally. It gets consumed somewhere domestically. It can be anywhere in the US, but if it's consumed somewhere in Tennessee, it can be sent to a composter that's local as well, and then come back to the same farm and grow another round of the same products again. So closing that loop around that circularity, having that regenerative loop there is incredibly important to the story of what Genera is and what we do.
But I want to also ask you from the perspective of cellulose, because you and I know that, every fiber is different. I even see a huge difference between a black spruce and a white spruce, or a northern pine and a southern pine, and of course, bagasse and straw. So talk to me from a perspective of miscanthus and sweetgrass, and why did Kelly or whoever that team was that chose these two? Because of course they went on to have it grown, so there must have been something there. And then what makes you guys so buoyant and bullish about that being a good fiber for molded fiber? But you're probably the only one doing this one. I don't know. I know you sell some pulp, but
Yeah.
but you're probably the only one in the world. So it'll be great to hear what their thought process was.
So the foundation of the business is in ag fibers, right? And so switchgrass and miscanthus are primary to us, but we have been doing trials with various different types of ag fibers. So, we've used sorghum and some hemp. We've used some wheat straw, some bagasse. So those things are not unattractive for us. So we would like to be able to optimize what those properties are that come from those ag fibers. We would like to be open to those things over time. But the core piece of it, the base, is going to really still come from that local piece. And because of the impact that it has on agriculture locally, and because we think we can replicate this model in multiple places. So if we have that core piece, and then maybe there are some properties that you bring in because you've got some longer fibers from a particular alternative form of ag fibers, that's okay, as long as it supports the overall goal of what we're trying to accomplish. So the mission is really to have that be a local tight loop there for us to be able to regenerate the soil. And so you see on a little bit of the Genera information now, we've kind of had this tagline of regenerate the earth. So we want to make sure that all of what we're doing supports that basic principle.
Do you have something to add to the conversation? Use hashtag GoodGarbage to add your own insights, ideas, and opinions on regenerative packaging and zero waste solutions. Now, let's get back to the conversation. But a couple of things in my years of experience with agri-pulping, what I've found, homogeneity plays a big role. And even what we find, at least even like we use mostly bagasse, and what we find is that even the bagasse between a mill and another mill is different. And you have to kind of understand that. So we literally test every pile and every truck that comes in, and how do you blend that. And you're talking about a wide variety, and I'd love to hear more about that. The second aspect on that is that when we've worked with agri crops, because of course in the case of bagasse it's much easier because it's already been taken into a sugar mill, it's been crushed, it's been washed, and it's relatively low in silica by the time it comes in. Whenever we have tried to use an agri crop, silica is a big issue because a lot of, and it doesn't have to be external silica, it could be just inherent silica that is within the fibers. So do you guys see that homogeneity being an issue because your product quality would change, and the issue with processing because of silica?
Now, I'm glad you brought this up. This is an incredibly important point, and it's a really interesting topic overall. Probably not for everybody in the world. Maybe your listeners care more about this because this is the space we're in. But that homogeneity, in as a manufacturing guy throughout my whole career, the enemy of efficiency in manufacturing is variability. Variability in raw materials is hard. Using recycled materials always is hard. And we think about that raw material, your point is incredibly important in that all of those fibers that you're talking about, the bagasse and the wheat straw and all, these are byproducts of a crop that was grown for a purpose. Nobody grew that cane, that sugar cane, with the intent of making the fiber really efficient to work in molded fiber. The crops that we're using have been bred for that. They are purpose grown, and their specific first point of value is for the fiber. So that's the first manufacturing step, is extracting that fiber. And because they are purpose grown, we can eliminate a bit of that variability in that raw material consistency. We have control of where that's coming from. And we also, we've been fairly deliberate about selecting which of those crops we use, what types of soils they're grown in, and basically trying to refine that process and optimize that as the first point of what this is about, as opposed to, hey, we have this stuff here that we don't know what to do with it. Should we burn it? Should we turn it into something else? Should we do this or that? And that's really that's a really foundational element of how the business is built around these crops.
And would you kind of, when we look at homogeneity, would you kind of have ratios that you've built over time that, this much of this and this much, the magic portion is kind of this, within this kind of, these two kind of ups and downs, kind of, what do you say? There is a word for it in a graph, right? Band, within this band.
Yeah.
Sometimes you forget simple words.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, so that's, at the end of the day, fiber is an organic material. You grow something, it's an organic material, and it's going to have some variability no matter what. So being able to work within that band, being able to control that band, having some level of control, some level of nimbleness within your manufacturing operation to be able to deal with what might happen in the raw material, that's very important. And I think as we refine these raw materials, I think we'll get much better at that as well. And in fact, I will tell you that we've made massive strides forward in the last 6 months as we begin operating at higher and higher levels of scale, as we begin to put pressure on the biorefinery to push output to what its max capacity is. That's been really important for us in discovering some things on the ops piece, on how we manage the various different pieces of equipment, but also in the raw materials. So what we mix, how we optimize those raw materials, how they come together, that's been something. Even in the last run that we had, we made some big changes to that, and we discovered some things that we said, oh, wow, we can improve some performance characteristics by doing X or Y. So I expect that learning curve will obviously sort of, level out, but right now we're very steep on the early part of that and learning a lot. So that's been fun, really. That's what you do this kind of thing for.
I read a very interesting book again. It's called Invaluable. And what it talks about is that we as business people tend to measure output matrices. And this could be production, profitability, turnover, sales, etc., etc. But what really matters is input variables, because if you think about a seed, all you can do is to nurture it well, put in the right soil, put in the right fertilizer, water it, if the right conditions are there, and hopefully nothing untowards happens, it will, again become a big tree. But if you start kind of digging it up and seeing the roots, you're going to kill it. So the idea was, what is your input matrix? And this is something I have been debating in my head. What is the input matrix in this business? And one of the input matrices that came to my head was, if we are talking all about leaving the planet cleaner, and we sell a lot of products, but we have no clue where it ends up, then is it really done? So one of the things I thought about was exactly what I asked you, and I was wondering if you were already thinking in that sphere, percentage of product composted, because then that would drive our thinking, and it even drives what is the kind of customers you sell to. Are you going to kind of resellers and you have no clue where it ends up, or you're going to go to more institutional sales where you can have that closure? So those were things that we were toying with as well. How does one get around to doing that? And the other one which I just wanted to put across in terms of composting, it's just interesting that yesterday we were talking to one of our composting partners, and the chief scientist there started laughing. He said, guys, you can't have everything. You want to have it less absorbent, you add in AKD and some oil proofing chemicals, and then you want us to compost. So he said, the absorption goes away. And I have a huge challenge, even with, cutting it down into, and now trying to crush your product, because otherwise the rate of composting is very different. So that's also interesting to see. Like you mentioned, it's more complex than we think in terms of the composter. So yeah, that's why the question, it was just on my mind.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a really important concept. And what I would say is it is something I've thought a lot about. So in prior life, in dealing with both plastic and fiber packaging, I would say that it's been a relatively recent phenomenon that packaging design includes any thought whatsoever about end of life. That's a past 10 years kind of dynamic. And I think that's really encouraging in some respects because it's very early days where people are thinking about that. And you see changes in packages that are thoughtful about that. And the end of life pieces of it, having a path for it is the first step. And then bringing it through is a very, very important finish point. And particularly if we think about different geographies, Europeans are just better at separating, collecting, and managing their waste. Americans are not as good at that and not motivated to do that. So we've got to find different solutions. And so each geography's got its own dynamic, and each place has its own challenges. And if we speak specifically about composting, it is an underdeveloped market right now. But we believe that access to compostables and having more of that in the market will drive more demand for composting. So it's a very small percentage of people in the US in particular that have access to real composting facilities. The collection mechanisms are pretty weak, but it's growing, and it's growing fast. It's, I think, 12% a year is the growth rate of composting capacity. Now, if you're growing on, I think it's sub 5% right now of access, but 12% growth is compounding over time. That'll have a big impact. So that build is important, but it's pretty staggering how much is not available. My wife and I did a trip to the Bay Area, and you think, okay, that's the greenest area in the entire country, and it's going to be, and everywhere we went, we thought, okay, this is going to be the place where you'll see some practices that we can learn from. And everywhere we went, we found compostable products. Plastic cups were all PLA. Everything was compostable. Everywhere we went, there was no composting bin. So there was nowhere to put it. And I'm not sure if I was the only one that this bothered in these places, but everywhere I went, I was asking, like, well, where's the composting bin? And there are commercial compost sites available in the Bay Area, but the collection points are not happening. And that is the thing we've got to push and solve.
And you're so right. Coming from a similar industry, we keep getting challenged on this. Where are the industrial composting sites? Then you can't have mixed waste. They'll take garden waste. They won't even take food waste, etc. And the rate of kind of composting is different. Uh, but in the end, we all have to start somewhere, and work forwards from there. And the other challenge I have, because of course we get into a lot of recycling discussions, and I find that lots of people are veering towards that, including a lot of governments, including Europe, which is really surprising, because I find that to be a kind of a it's a basic issue. Ultimately, one, you're coming from a non-renewable resource. The second, ultimately, it has to get out at some point. You can only downcycle so much. In the end, a water bottle is going to become fiber, go into your polyester shirt, and then, be thrown away. It cannot be downcycled anymore. Or it'll become a cheap poly bag, which again cannot be. So it could have maybe 5 or 6 turns, but after that, what happens? It has to get out and it will not compost. So I don't know if you have thoughts around that change in the whole policy framework and thought process that is happening, and how would you influence it?
It's a tough question. It really is. And I think that, one of the things I've really enjoyed about your podcast and listening to, what you've done over time is I think that often people who are trying to accomplish good things, who are trying to come up with solutions, they tend to exclude a lot of folks because they judge what those other paths are. And I've really enjoyed how much of a big tent you've created. And you've talked to people who are coming at this from so many different angles and who have ideas you know, that are very different from one another. And they are sometimes plastic solutions, sometimes paper. And the fact of the matter is that those substrates are all going to exist in the future. There is no idealistic world where, everything's going to have a package that just evaporates into the air and then becomes, part of the ecosystem and is perfect and beautiful. We still have to convey things from A to B. Every one of those packages has been designed with a purpose. A lot of the time, those packages are preserving a ton of value. If you think about food safety or food being able to be preserved in the complicated supply chains that food delivery in a global scale require, the packaging is incredible to be able to get that done. So it's not going to go away. And so you have to have solutions to those things. And so I think coming at that from various different angles is critical. It's got to be done. But if you really think about the limitations to getting that done, there are some big economics that work counter to what this is. So, there are lots of different answers to that. Overall, I don't know how I would legislate that. I'm generally not excited about having things legislate around that. A couple things I do like. One, in Europe, I saw different systems where they were actually charging for the amount of stuff that goes to the landfill, and then all the recycled stuff was free. So that's where that goes. The recycling goes somewhere, and it's the opposite in the U.S., where you often pay for your recycling. And I think that's one thing that's very positive. I think another needs to be some sort of economic driver to encourage more composting, recycling, whether that's investment in infrastructure or if it's just in creating some mechanisms where we require responsibility for people to connect to that and be deliberate about end of life. But somehow or another, economics need to be cured because the back end, it's easy to ignore without some level of incentive. I am encouraged in general, though, that it does seem like it's become more top of mind for people, and they do naturally care about it. It's, younger generations in particular, this is something that's really important to younger people. And I think that's going to help drive more momentum. But at the end of the day, you got to cure the economics for this because it's not always going to happen just on its own. Um, and I don't know, that's the thing that's tough to solve.
No, but I couldn't agree more. You get the economics right, the market takes care of things. And
Yeah.
till then, legislation can only do that much. It will force, and people are used to their convenience. So,
Yeah.
like you said, they're not just going to shift, not have potato chips. I wish they did, but they will, right? And they will take
Yeah.
away food, and so that's something that's in our DNA. And I want to make a quick switch to the other technology which you guys are dealing with, which is the molded fiber technology, the actual conversion of pulp into molded fiber. And that's been an age old technology. And what I see is that there is not that much innovation. So, how are you going about that? And somebody asked me that, why don't you set up a pulp mill in US? I said, oh my gosh, I would never be able to manage the costs. Costs, well, I'm going to be truthful. And I also said, people have this whole attitude in US, and I come from outside. So whoever listens and takes offense, please pardon me. This whole idea of work-life balance, which means I want to work less. So that's the basic fundamental of that idea. But that means that running a 24-hour plant without, you have to run 365 days a year for it to be economical. That would be a challenge. So have you been able to identify technologies that can be, you can implement and they run at a decent efficiency, and are able to kind of get the right people to be able to run them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've spent a lot of time in manufacturing in a lot of parts of the world, but a lot in the U.S. And I think that you're not being fair to the U.S. manufacturing base there, Vade. That's not,
I'm happy.
it's
I'm happy
no,
as
but
well.
I think you can definitely run a 24/7 operation. I've run a lot of businesses that were 24/7 in the U.S. Um, it does create some challenges, but there are people who prefer those shifts and who you know enjoy that, and I think that that's it just takes some thought. So I would say that it's not impossible, but cutting back to the more specific question around technology and figuring out how to do this with US labor, the plant has been designed in a very, very deliberate way around that. So recognizing the cost of domestic labor is a big deal. So automation is very important in the operation we've got. And I will say, I mean, I've seen molded fiber operations in China. They're pretty automated and they're very, very sophisticated. So it's not something that we had to invent completely. But we've been very careful in selecting technologies that will allow us to automate that are minimal labor. But as importantly, we've also selected technologies that are environmentally friendly. So in terms of the chemistry in the biorefiner, the pulping process, we've tried to be very thoughtful there. There is no bleach. So one of the elements of molded fiber is people want white. We don't provide that. We have a natural color, and that's part of the design of the business. And I do think that people are going to shift in that direction and recognize that. We saw that in paper bags when I was in that business, the shift from lots of prints and white paper to brown and simple and more environmentally friendly. So I think that's coming. But we've also been thoughtful about the other things. So we don't have PFAS additives, obviously. We don't have some of those other potentially worrying chemicals in the process. But we've also tried to make sure that what we're putting in those byproducts to make sure we can extract that lignin later is going to be easier. And then within the business as well, thermoforming, as you know, it uses a lot of power. So we've done a lot of work to try to identify projects where we can reduce the amount of power usage, reduce the amount of water and our ability to recycle water, power, things like that. As we design the plant, it's been very thoughtful with those things in mind, and I think it's been done really well. Nonetheless, we've learned a lot. And again, when we build another plant, it will be different. And there will be a lot of things we've learned and we'll be able to do better. But I know that you know about this stuff. Congratulations to you, by the way, on I saw the announcement about the plant in Guatemala too, and you mentioned that earlier. That's great. And I saw the announcement in the Capitol, and I said, how are they doing that? So whatever we're doing, I think you guys are doing some clever things too. So I don't want to imply that we've got everything figured out. I think that there are a lot of people trying to solve these things and an economic way, and to make sure that the return on the capital is good and makes it justifiable to build more of them, because that's the goal, is to expand this out. We need to have this big operation that's got some scale and mass, but there should be many of them in the end.
Yeah, if you ask my wife, she'll call me a delusional optimist, and that's probably how we are doing it. Or if we are, so I tend to kind of, and that's not a best quality to have to execute a project. You don't want to be an optimist to execute a project. You can conceive it, but then you have to hand it over to a more pragmatic person, and hopefully we have enough pragmatic people to keep me, leashed and not try to manage a project, because that's I've done enough blunders, Ben. We can have a coffee sometime, and I'll tell you more about the blunders and the amount of money I've lost. But yeah, we're definitely excited. Thank you for that compliment, and we are excited about that possibility of building a plant. And I would love to keep exchanging ideas and words as we go along. Like you said, there's enough of a market out there, and there's so much complementary work that we can do. And I'm excited about your announcement, which is a huge thing for the industry, a $350 million expansion. Would love to hear more about it, and it's great to hear that you're thinking about doing it differently this time and learning from all the years of work as well. So yeah, let's discuss that, and would love to hear what that expansion holds for you.
This is really to scale out. And as you know, it's hard to do any sort of pulping process at small scale. So, yeah, that was a big announcement for us. It was a realization of a lot of work, of a lot of people, and a lot of careful planning.
So now let's come full circle. We had started talking about the product side, and we switched. So talk to me more about your customer base, and who do you see as the most accepting? How are you placed when you compete? Of course, you have this USP of made in USA, but ultimately the customer, you and I have been long enough in business to know at the end of the day, it will come down to cost as well, not just it won't be only cost, but it will be cost as well. So how are you able to overcome that barrier? And in terms of quality, would you consider your products to be superior than what is coming in from outside, or equal to? So three questions actually piled up, which is what are the kind of customers, how's the receptivity in terms of cost and quality as well?
First of all, customer is really important in terms of who we are partnered with. So primarily right now we're making food packaging, food service products. We've got a few projects right now that are more focused on maybe retail or more healthcare type packaging. Those are important to us as well, but more important than the sector is that dynamic of intentionality. So the story that we have, this carbon footprint, broader carbon footprint impact, not just on the regenerative elements of the plants themselves, but on the entire supply chain, and that circularity that we can offer with the growth, the production, the usage, composting, and growth again. If we're able to get that to resonate with certain customers, those are the customers that we want to talk to, because we want to be able to connect with people who find this important. Because let's face it, if you're going to go from polystyrene tray or plate or whatever to a molded fiber, you're already paying a premium. So having that premium involved is something that having an intentional customer who cares about that first is valuable and important for us. Because we also want them to promote our story. So, and I know some of our customers, and the folks at Better Earth are good friends of ours, and the farmers fiber product that they sell, we love that. It's because they're really selling the story. They're not just selling a molded fiber product. They are very intentional, and they are finding intentional customers on the other end there. And that's a good example of what matters from a customer perspective for us. And then in terms of the product itself, to address your other question about quality, we're we're at a place where I don't have any insecurities about the performance of the product being any different than what's coming from Asia. I don't want to be overly arrogant about that because there's nothing good that comes from being overconfident. And if you look at the China base of manufacturing around this in particular, this is their market. They've been making these products for a long time, many years. Some of the folks in this business have been in for 20 plus years, and they've refined their technology as you were describing. As you're getting better and better over time, these are smart business people who are continuing to get better. So I'm not going to tell you that we're better than they are, but we can compete on a quality perspective, and we've solved the problems that we need to solve to be able to offer a product that works. Economically, that supply chain component, there are some really great things to talk about from a carbon footprint perspective and shipping things all over, but there are also costs to shipping things all over the place. So, having that raw material supply close to the plant, there is a natural, local, positive impact on the environment to all of that, but there are economic elements to that matter a lot as well. So that's one of the things that I think is going to be important for us in terms of long-term stability, and in terms of the economic viability of the business. So I think we've got some good things in place that with the automation and the simplification of the process with the local supply chain that allow us to be competitive. So I'm not worried about that. And then we've got the backing, as I mentioned, with the ARA folks that we'll get the thing to that place, and then it kind of takes on a life of its own.
So if you were to look 5 years into the future, what is your ideal situation? What is your optimistic situation? Maybe you're not as delusional as me, but yeah, what would you like Genera to be like? And you can choose tonnage or turnover, whatever you want in terms of what you're comfortable with. That this is where you would like to be in 5 years.
I would say ideally in 5 years that we will have there will be an urgent need for us to be building plant 2, plant 3, plant 4, because the demand will have grown to that kind of a scale where the momentum is taking on a life of its own. I know that there are other competitors out there doing similar things too, so I think we have a little bit of an advantage, a head start on certain aspects of that. But I think that it's going to be a big market, and there still is a ton of untapped demand, there are many, many untapped applications for these products. So if I think about the three products that we sell, and I think about the molded fiber, the pulp, and then the lignin products, the co-product that we have at the moment, that all of those will grow, and that will kind of frame how we build the plant 2, plant 3. I noticed that you have a multifaceted product portfolio that you're building in the Guatemala plant. I think that's smart, and I think that's I liken it a little bit to the Native Americans and their use of the buffaloes, and they would hunt that, and every part of that buffalo was important and useful in some way. And these crops that we have, these purpose-grown regenerative grasses, they have value in so many different elements of what that plant produces, and separating that stuff is tricky. So economically, we have to figure out what the right sequencing is there. But I think that we have a good path on that. We've got a lot of smart people trying to figure that out, both internally and external research partners. So I would expect that, the 5-year model would involve Genera having, 3 plants, at least those 2 and 3 are under construction. And the current plant, what I like to call rich man problems, that we have too many customers and too much demand, and we're trying to figure out how to keep everybody happy. And then we are expanding the market from there. So that would be my vision and the goal. And maybe I am wildly optimistic about that. But I think we are. One of the cool things about Genera as well is that it is a business that's been much less hype and a lot more doing. So a lot of people who are very heads down. And part of the reason that I'm excited to be on this podcast is because the Genera story really hasn't been told a lot. And there are other more high profile companies out there who've done a lot of stuff and had a lot more sizzle to them. And I think what we're doing is pretty incredible and really special. It's got good grounding in thoughtful economics, and I think that story has not been told enough.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. You're right. You don't tend to create too much market hype, which in a way, sometimes I think it's a good thing as well, keeping your heads down and working on it and
You have
let the
to back it
product
up,
talk
right?
for
You
itself.
have to be able to back
Yeah.
it up.
That's true as well. So in terms of our expansion, just to kind of, it's just two products. It's not a multiple basket, and within that, of course, that becomes a multiple basket. But it's molded fiber and flexible packaging. Those are the two we focus on. One on food packaging and one on food service. And you're also right what you said before. It's a very light product, so shipping it across the world is like 6 tons a container or something like
Yeah.
that, which is a lot of air being shipped. So you do have advantages on both sides, raw material availability and shipping out. And that's, I think, a brilliant business model. And you're right, those are the big costs in the end. The raw material and the shipping. So I'm glad that you're tackling that, and that takes me well to my final question, which is, what is good garbage to you?
Thought about this question a bit. What I would say is that good garbage gets recycled, great garbage is regenerated. And if you think about that circularity around the composting piece and all that, we've got to finish that out and close that regenerative loop. And that, for me, I think is one of the things that's special about the products that we're making and what we're trying to focus on at this point.
That's brilliant. We may have to go through a name change now to Great Garbage instead of Good Garbage. So thank you, Ben. This has been a this has been a scintillating conversation, Ben. I think there are so many similarities in what we are doing, and there was so much for me to learn in what you're doing. So thank you so much. I know you were very, very humble, and you said that there are other guests who would be better, but that's not true. You are really doing something
Uh,
which is remarkable. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us.
I have enjoyed it. And yeah, we are on similar journeys. So I'd love to stay in touch.
Absolutely. I think there's more to be done through collaboration. And there's, again, like you said, there is such a big market out there.
Well, thank you again.
Ben.
I really appreciate you having me on. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.